Hello, everyone. Well, thank you all for being here. And Womenjika. Womenjika means welcome in the language of the Wurundjeri Woi-wurrung people of the Eastern Kulin Nation. They are the traditional custodians of the land on which we are presenting today. And I would like to take this opportunity to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands on which we all virtually meet today. We pay our respect to the elders, past and present, and extend this acknowledgement to all Indigenous peoples here in respect of their cultural connection to the country. I would like to make a little disclaimer to start with. Please remember that this presentation is general in nature. It is delivered for information purposes only. Please do not rely on this information provided to address your personal circumstances. We're more than happy to take some calls offline to address your personal circumstances. But please, it is really important that if you have some specific issues, you need to consult with professionals to seek specific advice, which can include us, of course, if you wish to do so. We have expert audit, accounting, taxation, payroll, and of course, HR advisors who can assist you if required. The final 10 minutes of this presentation will be devoted to a Q&A. So what we would like you to do is to post your questions via the Q&A box, which you will find at the top of the screen. And when you're posting your question, can you please post them anonymously? It's just because, given the sensitivity of the topic, it is actually quite important to post them anonymously. We will be prompted when, you will be prompted when you're posting to switch to anonymous. So just click and choose this option. And we'll do our best to answer all the questions during the time provided. But if we don't answer your question, please reach out to us by email. We will send you our details, and we are more than happy to discuss this with you on a one-to-one basis. My name is Jan Fleischer, and I'm an associate director in the People and Organization Advisory Services, and I'm usually known as the compliance guy. And I look after HR, employment laws, OH&S, WHS, and ISO compliance and conformance. Jonathan Chikuto is here with me, and Jonathan is a partner at Forvis Mazars, and he leads the outsourcing accounting and payroll division for Forvis Mazars, and we will be just passing the buck and every now and then just switching from one to the other. We've got a very interesting topic. It's not the most fun topic to talk about, wage underpayments. However, it is something that is more and more important to discuss and to stay on top of because of the recent changes in the law, as we know, on the 1st of January 2025. We'll go over the evolving legal landscape, and I'll give you a little snapshot of how it's evolved. Then we'll talk about the employer's obligations, so from an HR point of view, but also from a payroll point of view, and the common pitfalls that can lead to underpayment and how to avoid it with proactive compliance strategies. Then what do you do if you're actually finding out that you have underpayment? And how do you respond to that discovery? There are different ways, and it really depends on the gravity of the issue. And then, of course, we'll look at some case studies. Very important to say that we're not here to name and shame. We leave Fair Work Ombudsman to do that through their enforceable undertaking. But it's just more highlighting that no one is actually spared, and that everybody can make mistakes, from huge organizations to small employers. We're all in it together, and there are ways to avoid falling into these traps. And then, of course, the last 10 minutes will be devoted to Q&A. So let's make a start. And the evolving legal landscape of wage underpayment, it's interesting because it's not new. You know, a lot of people thought, oh my God, 1st of January, this is the first time that we have criminal charges or prosecution for wage theft. That's actually not true. Victoria was the first state to criminalize wage theft in 2020. And then it was followed by Queensland, who introduced the wage theft laws in 2021, and then Western Australia. On the 1st of January 2025, it became a national legislation. The Fair Work Legislation Amendment, Closing Loopholes, Act 2023, amended the Fair Work Act 2009 to establish a federal criminal offense of wage theft for underpayment of wages from the 1st of January 2025. On that note, Jonathan, have you actually felt a little bit of a push since the change of the law for wage compliance reviews or audits? And I'm not talking about the ones when we actually have to rectify underpayments when it's already too late, but more from a proactive point of view?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's definitely been an uptick in inquiries and audits since the new wage laws came into effect, albeit they have been around for a little while. Just I think the 1 January date there has kind of pushed people into a little bit more. I want to know a little bit more. So I think businesses have now become a little bit more vigilant about compliance with those awards and the entitlements under the payroll regulations. And that, I guess the key areas that we've certainly seen an increase in inquiries is around the interpretation of the more complex awards. And organizations are now seeking a little bit more clarity on how to apply the award rates correctly, especially when it comes to overtime penalty rates and rostered hours. So certainly an uptick, but I think, again, like you said, it's a proactive uptick rather than a reactive. So I think it's a positive nature.
I think that that's the key, because the criminal offense, and we'll go into the detail of the definition of wage theft a little bit later, but it's about this intentional aspect versus the unintended. And what you don't want is you don't want to fall into the trap of knowing about things and doing nothing about it, which is called willful blindness. And we'll come into the detail of that a little bit later. So if we're looking at this evolving landscape, the first thing that we've noticed was that the wage compliance has become a critical area of accountability. It's no longer about just ticking the boxes. It is very clear that the regulators, the legislators, businesses, and employees are focused on addressing wage theft. And that means that it is not uncommon to have the barbecue lawyers, as we name them. We're talking about employees that actually know the law better than the employers, because the first thing that they want is they want to be paid the right way. And that's the minimum really compliance. And that's the minimum that employers owe to their employees, is to pay them what they are due. So the employees actually keep an eye on that and actually will read their payslip a lot more than they used to in the past. There's been a changing legislation. So as we know, the criminalization of intentional wage underpayment kicked off on January 2025. Now, what does that mean in terms of the impact on individuals and company? So from that date, 1st of January, an employer who can be an individual or a company will commit a criminal offense if they intentionally underpay an employee under the Fair Work Act 2009 or any industrial instrument. It doesn't have to be systemic. You could actually be a small business and you intentionally underpay one employee, and that could become a criminal prosecution. Now, while the new legislative provision primarily targets employers who engage in intentional, dishonest, or deliberate underpayment, those who unintentionally fail to meet employee entitlements may still face significant regulatory scrutiny and media attention. We're talking about, for instance, the enforceable undertaking. And it can potentially result in serious reputational damage. We'll actually see later on how it can destroy some careers. And it can also result in serious damage and loss, but also the loss of employee trust, which is critical. Fair Work can investigate suspected criminal underpayment offenses or refer the suitable matters to the Commonwealth Director of Public Prosecution. That's bad news if you're reaching that stage. Or it can also go to the Australian Federal Police for consideration and possible criminal prosecution. Now, the prosecution can result in monetary, fines, prison time, or both. What is very important is to understand that when you're talking about criminal charges, it's beyond reasonable doubt, which is very different from the common law, which is on the balance of probability. So the The way to catch people is a lot more difficult when it's down to criminal charges. But that means that the scrutiny is there, and Fair Work is really pushing hard on making sure that people pay their dues. There's been also an increased enforcement. That means that the FRO is actively using their regulatory power, including the power to prosecute. But what is also very interesting is that they've given power to the union to actually, for instance, bypass the notice for the right of entry if the union feels that the employer has got some underpayments issues. They can actually apply to the Fair Work Ombudsman to waive the notice and just show up and run an investigation. So much higher level of enforcement. There's also much higher penalties, and they will be impacting individuals and companies. But the most important part is that now it's really starting to impact lower ranked employees, such as payroll officers, HR coordinators. We're talking about really low level of implication, not just the directors or the business owners, but also very important in our role, for instance, is that third parties can also be penalized and fined, and it's part of the accessorial liability. So as a consultant, if you were aware of issues of underpayment and you did not do anything, or you did not notify your client, you actually become part of the problem. And that's a very dangerous field in which we don't want to walk. The focus on protecting vulnerable and migrant workers has really been the prominent aspect of Fair Work actions at the moment. They want to prioritize, sorry, I'm going to admit someone just now. There we go. And what is interesting is that, I don't know if some of you recall, but at the beginning of the year, the FRO and Home Affairs have joined together and paid a number of unexpected visits to businesses in retail and hospitality to check on migrant workers and skilled visa migrants. Now, a lot of these visits resulted in compliance notices because they were failure to meet the requirements. We'll talk about the difference between infringement notices, compliance notices, and forcible undertaking a little bit later on. Now, it is clear that the wage recovery and the scale of it is the reason why the law has pushed really hard on criminalizing intentional underpayments. Can you believe that $509 million of unpaid wages for over 250,000 workers, that was the amount for just the financial year 22-23. The staggering amount is in just over 2 years, over $1 billion recovered from unpaid wages. $1 billion. That gives you the scale. There is actually an estimate from the Fair Work Ombudsman. They reckon that, and I'm just quoting them, I'm not expressing my view here. They reckon that at least 40% of employers do not pay their employees properly. So the real question is, do you belong to that 40% or not? And are you 100% sure that you do not belong by mistake to that 40%? Now, there will be different levels of penalties for wage underpayments. The hardest one, that's the wage theft. That's the intentional underpayment. It can attract up to 10 years of imprisonment and or fines greater to 3 times the amount of underpayment, up to $1.65 million. Companies can also attract a huge amount of fines. And I recall a company not long ago. It was a small business. They had $25,000 of underpayments over a number of years. They were fined $60,000. The result of that 85 compounded $1,000, that was that they had to close down. They could not afford to pay it. They just shut down. So you can see that the fines, the penalties are very, very important to consider. And that's not even talking about the time, the cost, the effort to just fix the problems, and then also the reputational damage that will come with it when you're going through enforceable undertaking, which are published to public domain. And it's not unusual when you look at a company that had done a huge amount of great work in marketing. And when you Google, as soon as they become part of an enforceable undertaking, you type their name and the first page, it's all about enforceable undertaking. Destroy completely all the work that they did for marketing purposes. Now, what is an intentional underpayment? So the definition is that it occurs when an employer deliberately and knowingly fails to pay an employee their lawful entitlement. So that's minimum wages, penalty rates, or superannuations, and any other entitlements, as required under the Fair Work Act, the Modern Awards, the NES, or enterprise agreement. The key element is that the conduct is intentional. It's not accidental. It's not due to genuine mistakes. There was an intent here to not pay employees properly. That means that the employer was aware of their obligation and they chose to disregard them. That's where the criminal penalties will start to kick in. The second level, which then falls into civil penalties. So we're not talking about criminal offense anymore. It's the civil penalties. They're the most common ones. It starts with a general contravention. So it's something that actually it starts with technical breach. Technical breach is when you make small mistakes and Fair Work will say, can you please fix that? It doesn't attract any severe consequences. Because one thing that is very important is that you don't underpay your employees. You don't misclassify your employees, because these things can actually very quickly result in contraventions of the act. You've got the general contraventions, they're the low-key contraventions, and very often you will receive a compliance notice. Last year, over 2,400 compliance notices were distributed, resulting in about $17 million of wage recovery. Then you've got your regular contraventions. And the regular contraventions, they're mistakes, but they become systemic, ongoing, repeated, and that's when it starts to scale up. And then you tap into the world of serious contraventions. And a serious contravention is a breach of workplace law that is known and is systematic. The key element here is that the employee knew they were breaching the law. That doesn't mean that they intentionally broke the law, but they were aware of it and being quite slack about it. So the conduct was part of a systemic pattern, for instance, repeated underpayments or widespread non-compliance. It will attract the highest level of penalties, much higher than your general contraventions or regular contraventions. Now, it is important that you understand your obligation as an employer or as someone who's working for the employer, or as I like to say, working with the employer. There are two elements. The top part, as you can see here, it's the HR world. The bottom part, I'm going to leave it to Jonathan because there will be the payroll kind of world, but both are totally working together and should not be separated. Although you are working side by side, there has to be bridges, there has to be communication that is ongoing, and we'll see how it can help to prevent the underpayment issues. So one thing that you need to make sure is you comply with the Fair Work Act, the National Employment Standards, and the Modern Awards or enterprise agreements. Your technical breach. So that's minor procedural or administrative errors. The example, for instance, is that you could inform your employees of the time and place for voting on an enterprise agreement, but it was done just after the start of the access period, rather than at the start of the access period. Well, that's something that is not great, but that's not major. Fix it and then make sure that you don't do it again. It could be also a very small administrative mistake that don't necessarily affect the genuine agreement process. A contravention, however, it involves a breach. So that means that, for instance, you're failing to pay correct wages. You ignore compliance notices. Now that is bad. when you receive a compliance notice, basically Fair Work has committed an inspector to look at your processes, and they can find that you're in breach. They will tell you nicely, hey, fix this and fix that by that date. What I find, and we've had some conversations with Fair Work, they are very receptive to, when you talk to them, I have fixed it, rather than I will fix it. So one advice I would give is, if you feel that you're struggling with the timeline to fix the problem, ask for an extension. Because when you're going to have the summary conversation with the Fair Work inspector, it is so much better viewed if you say, yep, I fixed that, I'm going to send you the evidence. Yep, I fixed that, I'm going to send you the evidence, than having the same conversation when you're going to say, yeah, I will fix that. Because that puts them instantly on the back foot and having to wait for you again. They will be a lot happier if you use the past tense than future tense. Now, ignoring a compliance notice, just don't do that, because that becomes a very serious contravention. It will attract the highest level, and it could attract some civil prosecution. The other important aspect is, do not misclassify your employees. And of course, there's always that debate of contractors versus employees. That is a very important thing. We see a lot of flaws there when the contractors are not dealt with by HR because they're not employees. So HR doesn't look after that. The problem is that sometimes contractors, that can be a very, very gray area where, from an ATO purpose, they could actually be seen as employees, but also there could be a way, if they are predominantly delivering service, they could actually be an employee. So it's always good, if you have a lot of sole traders that work for your organization, to just have a word with HR, just to make sure that they are definitely contractors and not potentially employees. Jonathan, in your experience with the Fair Work Ombudsman, what do you think happens when you've underpaid employees, but the employer did not have the adequate records? So what is the implication there?
Yeah, so I guess the record keeping requirements from an ATO's perspective is your standard 5-year term. Now, from a payroll perspective, we know that 5 years, while that's a great number, it may not actually be adequate for payroll, because we have things in Australia which are very unique to Australia, like long service leave. And long service leave certainly extends past that 5-year period. So it may actually be more important to keep adequate records for the history of your payroll and for these specific people, because you need to make sure that they're paid on time. And if you don't have adequate records, if Fair Work come in and say, show me the records of you paying this person, and you don't have them, then the onus kind of moves to you to prove otherwise. And so I think it's really important, just on that point there, is to make sure that you are maintaining accurate payroll and employment records. We're talking about not just the employee details, but actual payments and leave taken and all of these things. And it's not just about Fair Work, it's about your employees as well. So if someone asks what's their long service leave balance, if that's not accurate at the point of them asking for it, it starts to create a bit of uncertainty around them as well. And as Jan said before, people are looking at their pay slips much more than once upon a time. And people are much more proactive at maybe even bypassing the employer and going straight to Fair Work or straight to the union. Once upon a time, maybe it was a discussion with the employer, but these days we've seen much more of an uptick in them going direct to unions and direct to Fair Work. So it is really important to keep those records, and just even if you're doing things the right way, if you don't have those records, Fair Work will push the burden on you to prove those things. So yeah, really important point.
Yeah, the reverse onus of proof is something that a lot of employers see as very unfair, but it basically means that the employee that would lodge a claim, for instance, doesn't have to prove that the claim is legitimate. The employer will have to disprove the claim. And that's a very hard and difficult piece of work if you don't have the written evidence to support your defense. What about the payment of wages and super and all these entitlements? I know that some awards, for instance, you would love to pay monthly, but you just can't.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So I mean, ensuring timely payments of wages, it's a box in itself. There's different awards have different terms, different requirements. So, whilst we would try and lessen the burden of administrative payroll, then push it to monthly. There's some awards like the retail award that you can't pay wages monthly. It's not allowed. It's either weekly or fortnightly. So it's really important to understand the obligations under each award to make sure that you're actually paying payments in line with the award and on time. We all know a little bit about super and making payments on time with super. If you don't pay it on time, it becomes non-tax deductible. There's also some intricacies about underpayments as well. But yeah, it is really crucial to make sure that those things are paid on time. There's also specific requirements on certain payments, like termination payments, to be made within a certain time period or time frame. And non-compliance with those things become a non-compliant issue, and then Fair Work have the every right to come after you.
It's interesting because one of the things that we see is that if you have an issue with wage underpayment, if it's actually affecting the minimum wage and the ordinary hours, then it will subsequently it will be affecting the superannuation. That means that not only now you've got an issue with Fair Work, but you end up having an issue with the ATO. And that means that now you're fighting on both fronts and you're going to get penalized on both fronts as well. So it's very important to be proactive in that sense and to avoid falling into these traps.
And then I
So
guess
let's actually talk about that.
sorry,
Yeah.
just a further point on that as well. One thing that sometimes gets neglected is payroll tax as well. So if you've got obligations of underpayments, there's also an obligation to rectify payroll tax as well. So payroll tax is not as nice as the underpayments because it's not a national thing. It's a state-based tax. So, and each state have different rules about these things as well. So it becomes quite complex quite quickly. And yeah, just another point to make sure that you're making those payments on time to try and avoid those issues.
Yeah, thank you very much, Jonathan, for that. And it's, for me, it's invaluable as an HR person that my desk is literally just opposite to Jonathan's because the amount of time that I just don't have the payroll brain. The same way that you will just turn and talk to me and say, Jan, that doesn't look right to me. What do you think? And that's for us, it's invaluable because we're on the same floor, we're next to each other. But for large employers in particular, you will have divisions that are separate, and we will find that one of the common pitfalls is the lack of regular communication, and that's when things can happen. Am I correct to say that it's not your job to interpret the awards?
So from a payroll perspective, it is silly for people to think that it's not your job, but also in smaller organizations, we know that there is a person or people that wear many hats. And so the payroll person is also the HR person. Or as you said, Jan, in larger organizations, we have 15, 20, 30 payroll people, 15, 20, 30 HR people who may not talk to each other as nicely as we talk to each other. Jan's my best friend now because we spend so much time together on these things. But it is really important to ensure that everyone is not only doing their job, but making sure that they're aware of their responsibilities in their role. And if it is you are the person that is payroll and HR, then you need to be across these things. If you're not, it is really important to understand whose job it is to interpret those awards and then communicate those awards with the payroll team to ensure that it's getting done properly.
Thank you. So that actually forms part of the list, and we could have added so many to the common pitfalls that can lead to underpayment. Obviously, because we're talking about wage theft as well, I'm gonna state the obvious here, but if you intentionally make wrong payments or do not make the payments that are due, you're going to be facing a world of pain. And it's just a matter of when, not a matter of if. You will be in trouble. And I'm an optimistic. If you're in HR, you have to be optimistic. And I really am a firm believer that it's only a very minute minority of people that fall into the wage theft category. The vast majority of people, they just want to do the right thing by their employees. They want to pay their employees on time and the correct amount, but the law is complicated. Australian laws are some of the most, and I worked in 4 different countries, some of the most complex laws, and they keep changing all the time. And it's very easy to just not know what happened. And then you don't know what you don't know. But if you're facing a judge and you say, but I didn't know, you will get always the same answer. Ignorance is no excuse in the eye of the law. That's your job to know. Make sure that you know. So it is very important that these unintentional non-compliance, you actually pay attention all the time to regular changes in laws or changes in the award. And one thing that is commonly a pitfall is that everybody expects 1st of July, yeah, salaries go up. Well, how often does it happen that it just happened mid-year? Now, whose job is it in your organization to keep an eye on the alerts from Fair Work? Because we get bombarded with the alerts, and you can actually filter by your specific award, but you still get a lot of things. You're like, yeah, no, don't care, no, not important, yeah, one day. And then you just miss that one email that was, oh, there's just been something that changed, and now the salaries have gone up mid-year, 1st of January or 10th of November. And then all of a sudden you're 6 months behind. And as soon as you're that behind, then you've now cascaded into a world of pain. So you need to make sure that, especially in large organizations, whose job is it to check that? And the communication then has got to happen. So do you have regular meetings? But I'm tapping into a bit of the strategies to comply. So let's continue with the various pitfalls. Salaries that are set too low to cover all award entitlements. Now, a lot of companies choose to pay annualized salaries, which is great, and they pay above the award, which is great. However, it has one big problem, is that you've paid that person 5 years ago or 6 years ago, you were paying them above the award, and then life goes on. But all of a sudden, the awards keep going up and up and up, and that person's job might have changed, but also the fact that if you actually compare their annualized salary with the base salary, so minimum wages plus all the penalty rates, the loadings, the entitlements, would all that be better than the annualized salary? The answer has got to be no. So if you have an enterprise agreement, by law, you have to run boot tests, better off overall test. And you don't have that legal obligation with an annualized salary. But you must make sure that annualized salary is enough to cover if you were to break down every single hour of overtime or working on weekends or working during public holidays or all these loadings. You've got to make sure that your annualized salary is enough to pay, and it's better off than the base rates plus all entitlements. If you find that there is a problem, address it immediately. Also, the incorrect application of award rates. So it is not uncommon to think that employees are, now, they're not under an award. Well, it's not always that simple. It's not always that clear-cut. Again, make sure that you seek advice from professionals to address these issues, because if you incorrectly apply a classification or no classification at all, it is a contravention of the Act. And that means that you can very easily misinterpret the complex payrolls that are associated with the specific award. Now, we talked about the contractor versus employee. but also the misclassification of employees. Again, that employee is great. They've been working for 10 years. Now we've given them a bit of responsibilities. They're managing 2 or 3 people. All of a sudden, we forgot that they were at that level, and now they are a much different level in the award, but we've not rectified that. So again, always keeping on top. Jonathan, tell us a little bit more. Like, I'm going to handball to you now on the typical payroll system errors that you would find.
Yeah, so just on that point 5 there, automated system-driven payroll errors, it is the most common thing that we see as a common pitfall leading to underpayments. Systems play an absolutely fundamental part of the payroll process, and if the payroll systems specifically aren't adequate enough for the complexity of the payroll, then errors and mistakes are going to occur. It's just a matter of time. It's not if, it's when. A lot of businesses that we see, and when we go in there, are using inadequate payroll systems. So they're potentially using an accounting software with a payroll module rather than a payroll specific software that can interpret awards or give you warnings when you're underpaying people, or when someone has a birthday, potentially the minimum rate needs to go up. If you don't have adequate payroll systems, it can lead to incorrect wage calculations, also integration issues. As you would appreciate, payroll is not just how much money you get paid, it's also about leave and making sure that those entitlements are tracked correctly. If people take leave, if people go on long service leave or take sick leave, those balances need to carry over into payslip sometimes and into the system, so people and employees have adequate knowledge of their liabilities and their entitlements. And also, just a very, very common problem is just the failure to update those systems. So as Jan said before, we have, annual award changes, sometimes mid-year changes as well. And if people aren't on top of that and updating their system, or have a system that they are able to update, then it will create a problem, because then what's going to happen is the payroll team will start to manually do things because that's what has to happen in their software, but it's not getting automated. It's not getting done automatically. And so when people do manual things, it just creates the risk of further error. Mm-hmm. And so I think having an appropriate system, a payroll system that speaks to the HR system, that speaks to time and attendance, because again, that is a very, very common thing that we see when we're going into businesses to review or do a health check or an audit. If the time and attendance system doesn't speak directly to payroll, there's some manual intervention somewhere which creates this opportunity for risk and error. So yeah, that's probably one of the common things that we see. And point 6 there about inaccurate timekeeping or rostering, it speaks to that as well. So if you've got a separate time and attendance system, that might be great and that might be doing the right thing, but that's not the final step. The final step is to get all of that information correctly into the payroll software to allow the payroll software to calculate the correct payments. So if they don't talk to each other, again, opens yourself up to errors.
Yeah, that is so critical what you're saying. And one thing that I found, which is actually quite interesting, is especially in large organizations. In small businesses, it's never a problem because everybody knows everybody. In large organization, the inadequate documentation for flexible arrangements. And that basically means that someone has gone on a flexible working arrangement, it's been agreed with HR, it's been agreed with the manager, and then it's on a temporary basis. So that person goes part-time, for instance, and then they go back to full-time because that's it, that's the end of it. Now the person doesn't need anymore that flexible working arrangement. And the problem is that the communication has not gone to payroll and the people are now paid not as many hours. Now, if it's 0.5 going into 0.1, the person will see that very quickly on their payslip. They'll know that that's not the salary I should get. But if it's a 0.8 into a 1, then that could be missed out for a few months. And then all of a sudden, you fall into the trap of underpayment. So that's just little things like this that can actually can have a big impact. And as we were saying, keep up with the award changes, make sure that you have a person in charge. It's really important. Okay. Now, the conclusion of that, remember $1 billion of recovered wages, and the majority of which was totally unintended. It's just non-compliance, which means that no one is safe and everybody really needs to stop and then reflect on what are our systems and are we really effective and efficient to make sure that we're not gonna have these common pitfalls.
I guess
So
just a further point on that as well.
yeah,
There's a couple of other things that we do see in that, and we talk about the systems. Now, our payroll people, HR people, typically aren't expert systems analysts. So updating softwares is not something typically that they are experts in. And fair enough too. So, one of the common pitfalls that we see is, inadequacy or insufficient knowledge of the payroll and HR teams. And this is not talking about them not being good at their job, because they are most of the time. It's about the fact that systems need to be updated, and if they're not updated by those payroll people or updated incorrectly, and if it's, a couple of cents here or there and it compounds and compounds, we're talking about an hourly rate for a couple of cents. If that compounds and compounds and compounds over weeks, months, years, it starts to create a very big gap as the years go on. And if it doesn't get rectified or changed, it will compound that issue. And I guess one thing I'd also like to say, and I know we're talking about underpayments here, but I've got my accounting hat on now going, it goes the other way too. And so you could find yourself overpaying employees quite significantly, which is a big, big cost to a business, an unnecessary cost to a business. And whilst it's great that we're in compliance with Fair Work as we're overpaying, great. But if you talk about it and bring this back to a business perspective, there's also on the table quite a lot of money that could be lost if you're getting that payroll wrong the other way. So it is really important to not only think about this from a compliance perspective, but also think about this as a profit discussion as well, to make sure that you're paying your staff the right way, full stop, either way. Not thinking about overpayments and underpayments.
That is so important, because if you want to pay your employees more than what they should be paid, that's great, because it's a reward for their loyalty, for doing the great job. If you overpay by mistake, that's a completely different matter. So yeah, thank you very much for making that point. So the key here is to be proactive. You want to avoid being reactive, because we know that being reactive will attract reputational damage, will attract cost, will attract pain, time, effort. So the little time that you can spend on being proactive will make a massive difference to protect you in the future. So what is the risk here? We've got the risk of the Fair Work Ombudsman talking to you, and nobody, like, it's a bit like when you're driving. I don't know about you, but if you hear behind you the whoop, 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 the police, you've done nothing, but instantly you go into panic mode because you're like, what have I done? Well, that's a bit like when Fair Work taps on your shoulder. It's the kind of feeling you just don't like and you don't want to have. An unenforceable undertaking is an agreement between an employer who failed to meet the requirement of the Fair Work Act, and then has got this agreement with the Fair Work Ombudsman to rectify this. That is publicly published, so that's the name and shaming. The thing about it is that you have to also understand why they do it. The reason why they do it is, if you are in an industry, talk about retail, for instance, or hospitality, which unfortunately is notorious for having issues with underpayments, they will use you as a deterrent to make sure that the others get the message that this is what you're going to get if you don't fix your problem. So they're going to publish all that. And then on top of not only the repayment, which then you have to go through external audit to make sure that your calculations are right. And then once you've done the external audit, you need to have an external review. So that means that then we actually go on site to verify that all your processes are now in line, all your ducks are in a row, to make sure that you're not going to do it again. And you've got to do it over 2 years. It's a huge amount of money, time, and effort that could be avoided. And that's not talking about the penalties, the fines that can be up to 3 times the amount of the underpayment. So you can see all that. Really, you want to avoid that. You also want to avoid is the scrutiny from unions, because the last thing you want is to have them turning up unexpected because they know that there is an underpayment. They've put an application to Fair Work to turn up uninvited, and then without notice, they just rock up. The Fair Work is very sensible about it. They don't just give that authorization willy-nilly, because they also understand that you don't want to disturb the normal operations of the business. But if there is genuine evidence, they will actually grant that. You want to also avoid the penalties as individuals as much as employers, because remember, the lower ranks now can attract also fines, and that's a very dangerous field. Now, when we talk about small business, a very simple way to avoid first falling into the Wage Theft Act is to follow the guidelines of the Voluntary Small Business Wage Compliance Code, because it will help you as a framework, not a strict checklist, to be compliant. Now, that level of compliance is assessed on a case-by-case basis by Fair Work. But if you follow these guidelines, you will not be prosecuted for under criminal laws. It doesn't mean that you're not going to face the civil penalties, but it really is an important thing. It only applies to small businesses, so less than 15 employees. For the others, it doesn't stop you from actually have a look and comply with it and follow the guidelines, because they apply to any business. It's just that that voluntary compliance code adherence is not going to save you from being prosecuted if you are a business of 15 employees and more. So there are a list of proactive actions that you can take. The first one is seek advice to confirm your obligations. Depending on which industry you're in, you are falling under particular awards. You've got particular enterprise agreements that you might be relying upon. Seek advice from experts. Make sure that you understand your legal duties, because it is fundamental before you take any other steps. That also means, for instance, that if you have found issues, talk to a lawyer. We are not lawyers, but we work with lawyers all the time, because they will put you in what is called a legal professional privilege environment. That means all the discussions, all the steps that you're taking to fix the problem will be protected by that legal professional privilege circle. And it goes with a lot of rules that you need not to break, because if you break that rules, it's like you've got a circle that is very tight and it's a seal. But if you break the rules and start to talk to someone who's not in the circle, then all of a sudden you've opened the floodgates, and the opposition can actually find their way through that floodgate to access all the information that you shared with other parties. So, but again, it's a conversation that I'm more than happy to have with you to explain to you what legal professional privilege is. But it is so important to know when you need to involve lawyers. Make sure that you investigate any complaint promptly, and I would say immediately. Timely investigation can really get the issue resolved before they escalate. So sometimes you've got an employee that will come to you. Just listen to them and make sure that you keep the communication open so that they know that you're working on it, and then fix the problem. Now, Jonathan, what is the role of a payroll review? Why is it so important?
So, as you said, each business is different. Each business has different awards. Some people don't under awards, or think that they're not under awards, and in which case they pay the annual wage and have to do the boot test. So I think it just is very important to make sure that you're doing a thorough review. And it's, initially, maybe if you haven't done a review in the past, it may be the first one is a more thorough review, and then it's kind of an annual health check after that. And so it's just important with all of the changes, all the legislative changes, all of the system changes, all of these things. It is really important to make sure that you're continuing to review these things. And yes, then it's additional cost to a business sometimes, but the consequence of not getting it right far outweighs the cost of doing those reviews or health checks.
I agree. You know what? Very important though to understand and accept is that when you do a review, you do what is called a sample testing review. You don't run a review of your payroll systems with all your employees. If you've got 3,000 employees, you're not going to run a review that with the 3,000 people. You run actually with a sample that is relevant. So it shows that if you have multiple awards, you're going to look at multiple awards, different types of employees, different classifications, but you just use a sample, which means that you minimize your findings to what is necessary to find. And if you want to discuss this further as to why it is so important to limit the scope of your findings, please contact us, and I'm more than happy to have that conversation with you offline. But it's very important that you just don't go all gun blazing. All right, I'm going to review the whole business. You don't need to do that. You actually need to start small, and then if you find that there are issues, you actually start to scale up your review. Okay, very important. Now, what's the difference between a review and an audit, Jonathan?
So depending on the requirement, so an audit provides assurance that something is done correctly or not done correctly, whereas a review is kind of just a sample check of what you're doing, and then it doesn't go anywhere. No one provides assurance on those reviews. So Fair Work sometimes force you into an audit, and in that case, you'd have to appoint an authorized auditor in that case to do those reviews. But a review could be someone like your accountant that can go in and have a look at things to see if things are done correctly. And like Jan said, if you can rectify something before talking to Fair Work, fantastic, because that's what they much prefer. You still have to notify them that an event has occurred, but it would be going to them going, hey, we have an issue, but we've already rectified it. Have a look. Here's all the evidence that we've got. So the audit is much more significant, much more costly. Obviously, appointing an auditor is expensive for some of these things, and it depends on how big your payroll is and how long the problem has been. If it's a 1-year issue or is it a 7-year issue? Really important to understand those things. So yeah, I think that's probably the difference between those two.
Yeah, I think that, and also what is really critical is that if you run a review with an external reviewer, the reviewer can actually give you some advice. They can help you to remediate. An auditor will just tell you what is going wrong, but it's a conflict of interest for them to advise you on how to fix it. They just will tell you, here is the problem, this is our findings, and that's it. So it's very important for you to balance the need for an audit or a review. And you can also have what is called an agreed upon procedure. So it's in between a review and an audit where you might use auditors, but then you're limiting the scope of what they're going to be looking at. And that's called an agreed upon procedure. Now, one thing that is really critical is to provide regular education and training to your key stakeholders on the correct wage compliance. Because one thing that you will find is that softwares evolve, the law changes, interpretation of the law, leave it to the experts, but your day-to-day, it's a never-ending self-learning environment. So you've got to be very keen to learn new things, but it is also the onus on the employer to make sure that you provide that training and professional development environment for your employees so that they're able to face these changes with knowledge and understanding and the skills that are appropriate to address these changes. Remember, ignorance is no excuse in the eye of the law. So you must keep people trained and up to date with the latest regulatory changes. Make sure also that, from a general corporate culture point of view, you want to make sure that you promote compliance. You want your employees to feel that they can trust. You've got their interest at heart, and you have that constant promotion of, we want to do the right thing by you. And when I talk to clients, I always start the same conversation. It's always good to be very nice to your employees, but that's not where you start. Where you start is don't break the law. Don't break the law is number one. Number two, don't create risk. Keep people safe, keep your business safe, keep yourself safe from prosecution, from any sort of hardship. So don't break the law, stay safe, and then be nice. That's the last very important thing, but that has to go in that order. Don't break the law is number one, okay? So you need to also encourage your HR and your payroll teams to work together, or your individuals. The hard part is when that HR and payroll team is just you, then you have to set time and allocate time to learn more about HR changes, to learn more about payroll changes. The problem with payroll is that next week you still have to do the payroll. It never stops. It's not like you can go, right, I'm going to take a week to think about these new changes. No, because next week the new payroll is coming. So it is a never-ending process, but you have to continue it all the time. That's the way to keep proactive. Now, sometimes you have to respond to a discovery. That's bad news, but there is bad news and there is terrible news. And you're going to see that I'm drawing a line here. The line that I'm drawing is pretty significant. There are different scenarios. The first scenario is an employee is telling you they think they've been underpaid. That's okay. You can address that very quickly. You look at the issue with them. You keep the communication. You fix it. Happy days. If it's one or two employees, it's still happy days. When it becomes systemic, and then you find that actually you've got now a problem with your systems, and it's most of your employees, that's when you need to stop. And don't rush into making quick communication to staff, for instance. Make sure that you know what you're going to communicate. I know of cases where people communicated to staff information that was inaccurate, and they made it worse for them. I know of some companies, the whole staff walked out. The union went, right, that's it, we're walking out. The bottom line is that once the investigation was done on the level of underpayment, it was not as bad as it was portrayed. So that what do you end up with? You end up with disgruntled employees because they know they've been unpaid. And then all of a sudden, you're telling them that, yeah, you've not been unpaid that much. Instantly, they're going to start not trusting what you're saying. So that red line is the difference between deal with it directly and anything below that line, involve the experts. And when I say involve the expert, talk to your law firm, talk to your lawyers, talk to your legal, because that's when any of that can go out of control. If an employee is talking to the union, remember the union can go and visit you unexpected. If your employee feels that they've been unpaid and they just need to show the payslip, then Fair Work will come and tap on your shoulder, and then you're going to start a process of investigation or compliance notice. Now, you don't need to dramatize things either. An investigation is what it is. They're going to investigate. They don't know, they've heard of something. Please tell us what's going on. That's not an admission of guilt. A compliance notice, if you comply with the compliance notice, is not an admission of guilt either. It's just that you're fixing problems in the timely manner that is given to you. And then that's it, nothing else. Compliance notice is not punitive process. It's just, hey guys, you've got a problem. Can you please fix it by that date? Yes, here it is. We fixed it. Okay, goodbye. That's as simple as that. But if you fail to meet the requirements of that compliance notice, then all of a sudden, that's when you start to tap into the prosecution field, and that's bad news. Now, what happens if the tax office and the state revenue office notifies you of an underpayment for superannuation? Do they come to you and you have to disclose?
Yeah, so it depends. It really depends. If you get notices from the tax office, it probably would a lot of the time lead to an audit, and it could be a superannuation audit. Or from a state revenue office, it could be a payroll tax audit. Obviously, interest, penalties, and non-tax deductibility of things, depending on the payments, can occur. So again, it's just one of those things that if it happens to you, you're going to have to spend time and money to resolve those things, whether you've done things the right way or not. If the ATO tap you on your shoulder and you have to go through an audit, it's something that you'll have to do and you'll have to respond to. So, yeah.
It's interesting because one of the things is that under the Fair Work Act, there is actually nowhere where it says you must self-disclose. So the general consensus is that if you feel that you have a systemic issue that is to a large scale, you're going to need to talk to Fair Work and let them know. But my advice would be that don't go and talk to them firsthand. Let your lawyers handle that. So it's very important, again, that if you need to notify ATO, if you need to notify Fair Work, ask your lawyers on how it needs to be done and if it needs to be done. The rules are different if it's the taxation office or Fair Work Ombudsman. Different rules in terms of self-disclosure. But very important that don't just pick up the phone and start to spill the bean, because you need to find out exactly what are the issues and do you actually need to disclose or do you just fix it? So very important, again, make sure that you talk to your lawyers. We work on their instructions from lawyers all the time, and it's much easier, much safer environment for everybody to work on once you've got that legal professional privilege protection around you to be able to really get to the heart of the problem, fix it, and then the decisions are made. Now, if you find out through your internal review that you have underpayments, again, don't go and communicate straight away. Make sure that you have a communication strategy that is in place for your staff so that you don't actually create unnecessary angst. You have to be honest, you have to be transparent, but there is a process to follow. And that's the key, is that first, make sure that you identify and you investigate the underpayment issue. So find exactly what the problem is. Then be transparent. So you must respond, you must talk to you and communicate to your affected employees in a timely manner. And in a timely manner is different from immediately. Again, if it's systemic and large scale, have a communication strategy that is put in place with the legal, okay? Then you need to remediate. There's no way around it. You have to fix it. So you need to clean the mess. And that's very quick. That has to be done promptly. That has to take priority. Then after that, you need to consider, will I self-disclose or not? And it's a case-by-case basis. Again, a legal firm will advise you on that. And then we can work with you and them in a protected environment. But you've got to be rational. Don't let the emotion kick in. Stay calm and composed and be rational in the way you communicate to all stakeholders, including external. Make sure that you find the source of the problem. Now, that is easier said than done, and you might need to rely on external experts like ourselves to find exactly where is the problem. Sometimes we find problems in very, very strange places. People who do manual entries on Excel sheets, but then they insert a new column, and all of a sudden, all these formulas have gone out of whack. I think that you're probably gonna agree with that, the danger of the spreadsheets, Jonathan.
Yeah, I think just anything manual entry lends itself to error. That's all it is. So I think it's just a key message to take away is to kind of review those systems. And like Jan said, if you can't find the problem and you know that there's a problem, we can walk into a business, and we've done so many of these now that we can kind of draw our eyes to the most common places. So I think, yeah, it is quite important to get advice where you think it's maybe out of your depth. Or even if it's not out of your depth and you just want a health check, it is just important to get on the phone to us and ask us questions, and we can come in and help.
Yeah, and then what is interesting is that you'll know more than me, because I don't crunch numbers all day, and when I see you looking at these like 3-screen spreadsheets, or I just have a headache just looking at them. But I think that if you're heading all day, all the time, there's a moment where you can't see it anymore. And having an external pair of eye to just have a look at that and go, oh yeah, I can see where the problem is sometimes invaluable. Just having that external view, very fresh, that will see things from a point of view that you don't necessarily expect. And remember, as a person, you will be affected by unconscious bias, which includes confirmation bias. Sometimes you will only want to look in places because it confirms that, yeah, this is what I thought, but actually you've not looked where you should. So be mindful of all these things. Relying on external has got a value, but also trust your people inside, as long as you keep training them. Very important. And finally, make sure that you maintain your records. That is for as long as it is required. 5 years, 7 years, forever. Be methodic. It's very important, because it's a major contravention of the act if you don't have the evidence. And remember, it leads to a reverse of proof. Now, again, before I show you that page, the purpose here is not to name and shame. The purpose is to show that the scale of the problem is huge. Nobody is safe. There are small businesses, huge organizations. These were not criminally prosecuted. We're talking about organizations that just make mistakes. And it's actually quite mind-blowing to think that if large retail or large food retail organizations with dozens and dozens of HR and payroll people can make these mistakes, what is the likelihood that you, with a small business, you're not going to make any? So different scale, different problems. But remember, in over 2 years, $1 billion.
And I think just on that, yeah. Look, I don't think we'll go through the case studies in detail, because we'll share the slides after the meeting. But I think Jan's message is that $1 billion of underpayments is significant, and no one's really safe. And if Fair Work think 40% of their businesses are underpaying wages or not paying their wages correctly, it's a message for all of us to go and do reviews. So you can go through these, and all of these are named on Fair Work's websites. And as Jan said, you'll probably see it in Google, if not. But conscious that I want to kind of leave some time for questions as well. Yeah. So
just before we go into that, I want to just tell you very quickly about the importance of willful blindness. Now, willful blindness is a very important aspect. It's one thing to intentionally not fix problems, but it's also another thing to turn the blind eye and try and ignore the problems. So be mindful that the law will be very, very harsh on you. The Fair Work will not treat that lightly if you ignore the problems. So don't fall in that trap of willful blindness. That's very important. That means that as an employer, but also as an officer working for the employer, you have a responsibility to keep your eyes out for any issues and to communicate the issue when you know about it. There is also the dimension of accessorial liability. That means that for people like us, consultants that work with clients, when we are aware of issues, we will actually tell the client about it. And now it can be in a different context if we work into legal professional privilege environment. But remember that you also have, as third party, obligations. If you are aware of issues, you need to communicate with the client, the business, to make sure that they are aware of the issues so that they get a chance to fix it. So that's very important. Okay, now we're going to be, we've got just time for a few questions. So please let us know what sort of questions you have for us. And again, if you don't have questions that you want to ask right now, we will actually give you an opportunity to have a chat with us, which means that offline, we will give you a bit of time to be able to ask us questions that could be actually specific to your circumstances. And that's part of what we're offering you right now. So that information session, we will conclude it with also the opportunity for individuals to approach us and ask us more specific questions. Okay. Now, Sarah Jane, do we have any questions? Now, I can see a few of them. So how often, that one is going to be probably for you, Jonathan. How often should organizations conduct payroll audits, and what should be prioritized to avoid non-compliance with award entitlements?
So the important message is regularly, as regularly as you think it's required, but I think at the very minimum, it needs to be done annually. A few key things to look at to kind of focus your attention is the employee payroll data itself, making sure that the start times and finish times are accurately captured. And this, we're talking about things that aren't time and attendance businesses as well. We're talking about people that, maybe pay these annualized salaries that, may work overtime. So you kind of need a way to track those, because that's what the boot test will be assessed against. It'll be assessed against all of their ordinary hours plus their overtime hours, regardless of whether they're paid the annual salary or not. Award rates and conditions, making sure that they're regularly checked and making sure that the system has the appropriate award rates in there, the new award rates every time they get updated. Again, I talk about systems, HR integration system. If someone changes roles and goes into a new category or gets a salary increase, if that's not reflected if it's reflected in the HR system but not automated into the payroll system, could create some issues. Manual intervention, avoid it as much as possible. I know you'll have to do something, but try and avoid as many manual touch points or hand touch points as possible. Doing annual wage reconciliations, really important, not only for superannuation, work cover, payroll tax, but just underpayments of wages as well, really important. And just, like Jan said before, those employee classifications, making sure that you review those on a very regular basis as well.
Thank you very much, Nathan, for that. There's another question, that one I might just answer and then maybe handball to you. What strategies can you recommend to improve collaboration between HR and payroll teams to catch potential underpayments before they become an issue? I think that my view on that is have some set times in the year when you're going to meet. Don't just assume that the person is going to come and talk to you when there are changes. You know that 1st of July, the rules are changing. Let's have a meeting. So have a set time. I would say if you can meet quarterly, even if it's just for 20 minutes, any updates, anything that we need to know. We're payroll. HR, tell us. HR, we're not payroll. Is there anything that you need from us? So having that set time that is in place quarterly to make sure that things don't go out of hand. Because again, small problems are easy to manage. That's when it becomes a systemic problem, and it becomes very, very hard. And that's when actually then Fair Work is involved, the ATO is involved, and all these things. So I would say that the main strategy I would recommend there is to have set moments in the year when you actually meet. And hey, how about just even a coffee and a chat? How nice would it be if you've got nothing to talk about other than the weather, which could be very good. But realistically, there are always changes. There are always little things that change, but also the changes that are specific to you. Like, oh, okay. Oh, by the way, John and Mary have now moved on to that level. Okay, thank you very much. We're going to update that. Okay, so I would say it's one of the key strategy is communication, making sure that it is organized and through a system. You've heard us saying a lot of time the word system. That is really because that's the key. If you have solid systems in place, you will be very proactively avoiding the pitfalls that would lead to underpayment. We don't have time for other questions just now, but I would like to thank you all for attending. Just to recap, this is a problem which it would be very arrogant of anyone, including us, to think that now we're totally safe. We don't need to worry about it. It's very proactive of you and very positive that you are here listening, because that means that you want to do the right thing. And I think this is all about just having systems in place and be methodic to make sure that you always look out for any potential issues. Listen to your staff. They might sometimes tell you things that you're not even aware of, because they're the ones who look at their own payslip and they know their time records. But I would say that the wage theft, because this was the real big thing, 1st of January, it's not for the majority of us. The majority of us is let's reduce the errors. As Jonathan rightly said, let's reduce the level of manual entries that can lead to errors. And let's also rely on the experts. So I can never stop to emphasize the importance of legal professional privilege. If you find that you've been caught in the webs of underpayment, make sure that you actually get legal advice on that. But also, we're only a phone call away if you need us. So thank you so much. Really appreciate you taking the time. I hope that it was valuable. We will follow up with an email with a recap, a summary of what we presented. And as I said, the opportunity for you to talk to us as well. Thank you so much, and have a lovely day.